Here's an experiment for you. Take passionate experts in human resource technology. Invite cross-industry experts from inside and outside HR. Mix in what's happening in people analytics today. Give them the technology to connect. Hit record. Pour their discussions into a beaker. Mix thoroughly, and voila! You get the HR Data Labs podcast, where we explore the impact of data and analytics to your business. We may get passionate and even irreverent, but count on each episode challenging and enhancing your understanding of the way people data can be used to solve real-world problems. Now, here's your host, David Turetsky.
Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I am your host, David Turetsky, and like always, I try and find you the most brilliant and insightful people across the world of HR and beyond to talk to us about HR data and analytics. Today, I have my great friend, Chris Havrilla. Hello, Chris.
Hey, how are you, David?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
I am awesome.
Yes, you are. For those of you who don't know Chris, she was my friend at ADP for many years. She was responsible for their HR systems operation and for their global HR transformation. It was a big job, but now Chris has an even bigger job as the leader of the human capital research and sensing area within Deloitte. Tell us a little bit about that, Chris.
Well, I am. So it is such a mouthful. I am with Deloitte Consulting and in their human capital research and sensing area, which is formerly known as Person. And it's all a tremendous mouthful, but it just means I'm their resident tech industry analyst for human capital. And I do research and strategy and advisory around people and technology. So I get to study everything organizations and vendors and Deloitte and you all do, and tell you all about what I'm learning and what is happening. And that's the research part and kind of what's coming. And that's the sensing part. And really, and I think particular for this topic, all the resources and tools you can think about going and solving for all of the workforce, workplace issues. So that's the strategy and advisory part, but it's all about the how. So I love that part.
And I love listening to you talk about it. And that's what we're going to have fun about talking about today. But one fun thing that you may not know about Chris is that not only did Chris play water polo in college, which I find fascinating and no surprise, but that you were on a pit crew for race cars. What?
I know. Isn't that crazy? And you'll appreciate this when I tell you what, kind of how it started. But I love all sports. So I've always been kind of a sports geek. And I did play water polo in college. And that was back before we had women's teams and men's teams. There was a team. So it was intense. But The pit crew part started because I would go up to Road Atlanta and do timing and scoring and work in race control in, up in the suites. And I was super good at figuring out splits and doing all that stuff because, it wasn't all computer generated back then. Sure. I got hired onto a pit crew to sit on the track and figure out the differentials between, where they were, how far off they were in first place, how far off the car was, when they needed to accelerate, how they needed to take the turns. And so they put me on the pit crew to do that. And so my job on the actual car stuff was changing tires and opening up the engine tops. But it was really to stand on the track and hold out a chalkboard and say, you need to speed up by about, 10 miles an hour and hit that turn
awesome.
at
awesome.
a different time.
So you were doing basically race analytics before race analytics even existed.
Before, they call them spotters now. But there's like an actual job. But this was pre those days.
You're truly a pioneer. And now we know why.
And now you know why. Exactly.
And that actually leads us to the topic we're going to be talking about today, which is changing how we work and reimagining the world of work and how HR has a role in that.
I love it. Let's bring it.
Awesome. So, Chris, the first question is, why now are we talking about the need for change? What's happening? Why is it a big deal today?
Are you tired of talent and HR podcasts that sound like corporate training videos? Same. Talentless is the no-fluff show about hiring, leadership, culture, and what's actually going on in the world of work. Talentless is a podcast for recruiters by recruiters. Hosted by Desiree Goldie and Ashley King, they're smart, occasionally salty, and never afraid to say what everyone else is thinking. Listen wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe at talentlesspodcast.com.
I think the
Loaded question.
I'm laughing because we've been talking about change and doing all
Right.
these things for so many years now. It's getting painful, but I don't think there's any doubt that I know I was amping up the discussion. Even the last few years, as we kept seeing all these disruptions, right, over the last 10 years, massive disruptions in data and tech, and we were coming out of the recession for a while, and
Right.
we had all this stuff, and the demographics of the world were changing, and we knew in probably 2025 the whole workforce makeup would be different. And then the mother of all disruptions happened with this pandemic, and it has accelerated a lot of those discussions that we knew were going to be changing anyway, as business models and talent models were changing, and it really just kind of put everything on turbo, right? And so when when fundamentally everything in your work and workforce and workplace has had to change because of this pandemic, literally overnight and on a global basis,
Right.
it really kind of put this front and center, and it pushed us to even rethink our roadmap, right? And I talked about there's research and kind of seeing what's been happening, but then there's sensing and what could be coming, what can we extrapolate from the past to see what's coming, and it was clear that even the focus of my work was going to have to change. And so I have two big bodies of work this year around. One is we're doing a high impact study on culture change, which we had already planned, but now I'll be kind of working on an angle of what role does AI have on that.
Right.
I've been talking about this notion of AI as part of the talent equation and technology as part of the talent equation for a couple of years now, and how do we think about AI coming on to our teams? We call it super team, and if they're a collaborator, right? How do we bring people onto the team and that not change the culture? So do we want to be in the driver's seat of that, or do we want to just kind of wait and see how that happens? And then there's this notion of reimagining work and re-architecting work that I'm embarking on as well.
And this is nothing new. I mean, if you think back to the 80s, when there was a time when there was not a computer on every desk.
Right.
And people did things with handshakes. They did things talking person to person. A meeting had a very different context. Whereas today, if we kind of jump from 1985 to 2021, we're talking about we use computers not just in everyday life at work, in almost every moment at work. We use there's a computer on our wrist. There's a computer that's central to our home hub. There's a computer in our pocket, which is a phone. We basically carry around 4 or 5 different computers, and they all serve different purposes to help us in life and at work. So the notion of the change of work from technology has been evolving really over the last 30 years at least.
Oh, yeah.
And so it shouldn't be a shock to anybody that it continues, but the way and the pace and the intersection is changing.
It really is. And I mean, if you think about it, the notion has been there, but the technology has been the work, right?
Right.
The technology has been the work. We've been feeding the beast since, as we look at how the industrial age, kind of evolved, right? And the technology became the work because we moved everything from, paper to online, right? And we fed the beast. We fed the beast with all this data. And I always say we were, information rich or data rich, but information poor, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And we haven't used technology, to kind of be that collaborator, right? It has been the work. And so as we start to shift our notion, and we write about this intersection of humans and technology, in our 2020 trends, we really started focusing on how do we bring humans and technology more together to unlock human potential, right? Than being kind of, we're always at odds with our tech. We all know that. But I think there's this other notion, right, of maybe the evolution of productivity too, and what that looks like, right? Because this tech has been the work, right? How do we kind of, I don't know if you redefine productivity, right? But I do think that there is this emerging focus, on redefining fundamental assumptions about work to achieve business outcomes, maybe beyond anything we've ever achieved before, right? If we actually bring technology onto the team as part of the talent equation, as assistance versus, the work itself. But I also think just, reframing productivity and how we create lasting value. And I think, we've always focused on productivity before as output, right?
Mm-hmm.
Revenue, profit, products, services, whatever, right? And I think this notion that's shifting really is on outcomes, right, versus output. And I think that's where you can start to think about results maybe that we've never achieved before, because we're actually changing the lens. So, before it was always about incremental change, like how can we produce more in less time, or how can we eliminate waste, or how can we optimize processes? But I think we've got to realize that this isn't about input, process, output anymore. I don't know that it ever was, right? Like you'd watch how people worked, you're like, where's that on the process map, right? And now it's more about flow. How do we actually make decisions and take action and focus on outcomes?
But I think this may be too simplistic, but if you think about the reason why things are changing for that, it might be because in those things you were talking about before, there was always an accounting element to it. Yeah. Whether it was an outcome that was cost, and we were trying to minimize cost. Right. So we were looking at the per piece cost of getting something done, and what were all of the inflection points along the way? What impacted cost? Could we take anything out of the equation that made cost less? Exactly. Instead of looking at, are we optimizing for what the end result is? We were looking at all the pieces. We were looking at the story arc, basically, of how something got done, and looking at all the intersections along the way to measure them and to ask, what can we do better to reduce cost? Now, what you're talking about is measuring the outcome and saying, listen, could we transform this entire process by not looking at each of those inflection points and asking how they get done, but saying, how can we achieve the outcome better, and looking at tossing out the baby in the bathwater to be able to say, are there different ways of doing it?
Exactly.
And that leads me into my next question, Chris. What technologies are furthering the ability for us to make those changes? So what are those individual instances of technologies? What are the impactful technologies? And not the providers, but what are the things that are actually getting us to the next level? You had mentioned AI.
Right.
Is that a technology that's going to make us better? Or is that a technology for us to leverage better? Or because people are using it today.
Yeah.
But how do we move forward? What are those technologies?
Well, I think the answer is yes to actually both of those, right? But I think you have to step back, because we've always used technology for technology's sake, right? And without the intention, maybe that, and I think that's why technology became the work, right? And I think you kind of got to step, kind of high before you step down, and look at the why we're moving away from that cost, as the only lever here, right? And I think it's the same notion that we keep talking about in moving from a business enterprise to a social enterprise, right? Where you're taking care of all of your stakeholders, and not just kind of your insular focus of, here are our business metrics and here's this, and we take care of our customers, but taking care of customers and employees and or workers and suppliers and partners, and we have to move beyond cost, right, to include value and meaning in that. And I think that's how you do that. And when I say, costs, we're always going to be seeking to optimize efficiencies, right? And I think that's still a dimension here in this kind of future of work drivers, but it's also value and that ability to kind of seek to expand opportunities, right? And the meaning part, and all kind of soft and you can hear all the non-HR eyes maybe even rolling like, okay, here we go, right, into the intangibles. But, how do you seek to make a difference that matters or motivates? And I think once you do that, right, you can, it's again, output versus outcomes, right? If you've got that lens of outcomes, you can start looking at, work outcomes and how you'll move the needles in these three kind of dimensions of, quote, productivity, right? Cost, meaning, and value. And I think once you do that, then you can start to have that question around this notion of super teams that we talk about in human capital trends, which is all, public facing data and fascinating, right? But how do we actually, and our data had shown that all of, how people have been utilizing AI was really on current work outcomes, right?
Sure.
Current work output. Right. And I think it was, when you started really digging down and seeing, have people actually reskilled their workforce to embrace these new workers in our, on our super teams? No, 1 in 6 companies have really started to do that. So all people are still kind of doing is mostly in this kind of substitution. I'm going to move this work over here. And not on insights and value, right? And this notion of, look, we start with a question, a problem, a trigger, an event, right? A pandemic, whatever. And then what are our outcomes? And what is in between, right, is flow. It's not process. It's not these linear steps, right? How you get to this outcome may be different today than it was yesterday. But it becomes at the heart of it, how do we make decisions and how do we take action? And that's where AI coming onto the team as a collaborator, even beyond augmenting, right? How can it help us make decisions and take action versus just be this consumer of data that just spits out metrics, right?
And one of those problems I see for AI, and I've talked about this in the past with other people on the podcast, is that it's trained by data that ultimately may have been biased in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not just talking about the DE&I type of bias. I'm talking about it's biased based on the decisions that we fed it. We tell it things. Yeah, I mean, we've given it a subservient role, to your point. We haven't treated it as a teammate. We've treated it as a servant. Right. And we've given it data that should serve our purposes instead of asking the AI to tell us what it wants or to talk about the outcomes and to be able to help us with the outcomes.
Or what it's seeing, right?
Right.
And this is that collaboration point, right? Like if it's saying that, and it's recommending things that we know aren't right, you have to step back and go, why is it doing that? Just like we would if I hired, my kid, right? And you still have to give it data, give this person, this assistant data, guiding rules, right? And you still got to manage and audit and give feedback because we take a lot of things for granted, right? And especially in the, where we have to be truly explicit with this, digital worker who doesn't have curiosity, who doesn't, have phone a friend, who doesn't have all of these other things that we've let humans, kind of figure it out, right? But, with these digital workers who can work faster and at bigger capacities than we ever have, we just can screw up that much faster and at bigger capacities if we don't actually manage, right? If we don't actually build that muscle set to develop. And AI, it's funny, I just put this video together that we're going to put open universe soon, which is really kind of what is AI? Like, what is it and what is it not? And it's not automagical. You give it bad data or you give it data that has been doing bad things or shown that we've done bad things, and it's going to take that. So the collaboration part is I help the machine helps me, right? We're nowhere near a point where we can trust because of our own misgivings, right?
Exactly.
Our own misgivings. So we can't do what real AI can do. It's really just statistical. It's not, intelligent yet. We have to help that.
Exactly. And if you give it a box and you tell it to perform inside the box, to your point, like, for example, the chat bots we use for doing scheduling, schedule my appointment. Yep. And you tell the AI, schedule my appointments and, do this and that. It will do the tasks that you've asked it to do based on the inputs you've given it and the box that it's in. And it will it's not going to go get you coffee.
Right.
Unless you schedule it to go get you coffee using DoorDash or something, unless you use macros.
Very explicitly.
Exactly.
Right.
But in the same way, we used to do that for people. We used to tell people, here's your job description. And here are the things you're in control of. Here are the decisions you can make. And here are the decisions that I'm going to give you as the person who's your boss.
Right.
And we still are in that mentality. To your point, treat it like a teammate. Give it the appropriate, and I think this is where you were going, Chris, so pardon me if I'm wrong, but give it the ability to make some decisions and to grow and to learn from how we're working.
Yep.
And maybe it can see things and tell us differently how to do things or to help us with doing things in order to be able to get to a different place with how we work and what the outcomes will be.
It's exactly it. And I think, we probably didn't always do this as well with people as we probably could have and should have, but we have to do it, with these machines. But it can help us in turn on levels we can't even see. So, whether it's, work outcomes, whether it's, how do we actually, make an inclusive environment or an equitable environment or whatever, right? That data that it has, right? We can help each other with that. Like, this is what it's showing. And it's like, okay, now what can we do? And it can, and maybe it can give us recommendations and guidance, but we have to test that using, our own, what we know to be right and good in the world, right? So, I think it's my friend John Sumser who always says, our new job is to argue with the machines. But I think it's really kind of a sound thing because it's like, why did you do that? Like that doesn't look right, but it's just really spitting back what we've all been doing, right, for the past. So it's like, okay, we've got to tweak this. I have to teach, I have to develop and manage to what I know is right and what I know is good and intentional. And we've taken that for granted for years with people, but we can't with machines. If we were ever going to get to a whole nother set of outcomes we've never before thought were achievable.
And I think one of the problems that we're going to have to realize, and you've mentioned this just now, is the overcoming of the data needs to be something that the AI helps us with. We can't go back in history and change all the transactions. We can't go back in history and restate things to make them look better or to make ourselves feel better. We need to have the AI help us by looking at what we've done, ignoring some of it, or learning from it even better, and be able to overcome so that those decisions that get made in the future, the AI helps us and it helps us prevent those bad decisions from happening.
It can show us blind spots we didn't even know, right? I mean, that's the beauty of this. I wrote we do a prediction series every year, and I did my prediction this year was around, data transparency and the fact that, look, the data is there and we shouldn't be scared of it, even if our data is bad. And using these kinds of technology, right? We just have to be not only transparent, but then show how we're going to, to do exactly what you say. How do we right this ship? How do we anticipate risks that we didn't even know were there, right? We can get ahead of these things, but we can't hide from what has happened, right? And I think even when we talk about things like, and you and I have been talking about this for years, right, around pay equity and things like that. And okay, maybe as a business, we can't afford to make things equitable, so we're just not going to do anything. Well, now with the new, SEC rulings, with the way boards and investment companies and even the workforce itself are demanding to see these things. So I think even if you can't fix it right away, you can't stick your head in the sand anymore either.
Yeah.
Like there's going to be a time where you have to produce this data and you have to start acting on it. So having a plan, and that's
Exactly.
where technology can help us too. How can we do this? What can we model? What can we look at? What if? Decision support is a huge value add from things like AI, right? To start doing what if analysis and start doing modeling and looking at things in different ways. So, it's there, but we have to embrace this again, not on current work outcomes, but what are our future work outcomes and how can we help each other get there?
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by Deloitte Consulting and listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
So, Chris, that brings me to the next question. And we don't have to spend a lot of time on this because we could actually have an entire episode just on this. But where can people begin? Where can people begin? What is the impetus to get this stuff started, to actually start the transparency and the uncovering? What can they do? What simple steps do you think that they can do to make this happen?
If I were going to break it down into a simplistic thing, and look, we publish a lot of this, I call our trends, oh my God, what, right? It's like the wake up call.
Right.
And then the work that we do in research and sensing is all about the now what, right? So I would say there's two simple answers, right? You can absolutely look at the at the work that we're doing because we build tools and stuff like this all the time. But if I'm really going to break it down into a simplistic set of steps, our new world is not about putting out process maps and setting out, here are the 8 steps, here's the linear steps, right? We're in a new world, right? We already know that people are working as a network of teams. We already know that a lot of this stuff is already happening in structures that are outside, our old lines and boxes world, right? And this was kind of the advice I gave a lot of companies when we, post-pandemic and people were just trying to figure out how to get work done. I was like, quit worrying about how, let your workforce figure out how. But if you can get people focused on outcomes, what needs to happen? Why? Connect them to the work, connect them to what their contribution is to that. This is what we're actually trying to do and why. Maybe when, if that's pertinent, right? Sure. What, why, when, and get out of the how. Let your workers, the people closest, what needs to happen in the work, to let them figure out how, and let our job being able to figure out how can we make this easier for people, right? And I think if people are using that lens when they're thinking and reimagining work, or if they're thinking about tech's role in this, that it is how do we make work better for people and people better at work, right? And they're the ones that are going to be the closest to that. So I think the less we control how and let that flow that we were talking about earlier happen, right? And think about how do we arm people with what they need to make decisions and take action to get to those outcomes. So give people what, give people why, when if it's imperative, right? And it's breaking it down simply, and it's bigger than that. But if that's the frame, even if we're on a small scope to a bigger scope, that's really what we're talking about here.
Sure. I can't even comment on that. It was beautifully said.
Thank you. It's just getting it done, right? It really was fascinating, to see the data shift. Like when we had our 2021 trends come out, and prior to COVID, when companies were looking at and these, the C-suite was thinking about work, right? It was really about optimizing work and redesigning work, and the numbers post-COVID, right, went, I think it was like 29% were trying to reimagine work. It went up to 61% in a matter of months.
Wow.
That they're reimagining work. And the options were, we're not transforming work, we're optimizing work, we're redesigning work. Reimagining work is where we went from 29 to 61%. And so work reimagination is critical to future success. And I think that's where it's going to be solved, is getting out of the how, letting people do that, and focusing on what why, when. And that's what I'm talking about when I
Right.
talk about value and meaning and those dimensions in the productivity model.
And I think that gives HR a lot of impetus.
Absolutely.
Back to the change that the CXOs are looking for.
Yeah.
I think that gives us a lot of impetus to now go back and say, we're going to change. We have to change. This is now our time.
Right.
And let's come up with those ways and let's make it happen. Because if we don't, we've lost this opportunity. We may not actually get a better opportunity than right now because the world has changed around us and everybody will understand it and appreciate it because their world is completely different.
Well, we did an open memo to HR in our 2020 trends, and we expanded on it, in 2021 and what was released just in December, because, we said, like right prior to COVID and then post-COVID, we did the update in December for this open memo to HR and the data we had around it. And the open memo was all about how does HR expand their focus and extend their influence. And, and that was really, expanding focus is beyond full-time employees, right, to all workers and to the work itself, right? And it was all about the power of work. And then this extending the influence is not just thinking about the function, right, but thinking about the enterprise and that whole ecosystem, that whole stakeholder network. And HR needs to be positioned to be influencing what's happening inside and outside the organization. So we're telling them somebody has to own work and workforce, right?
Yep.
Somebody has to own this, and it isn't going to be the business. And it's
That's right.
Exponential shift, right, for HR to a strategic leadership, not strategic business partners, but strategic leadership.
That's right.
And we call that exponential HR at Deloitte. And there's like 4 big things that need to take place, right? And one is we've got to increase the capabilities of HR professionals.
That's right.
And 2, we've got to change the HR org design to incorporate kind of more agile and more team-based work. But that third thing was, how do we actually bring technology onto the team to help, right? So increasing that, not just efficiencies, but collaboration, right, with these emerging tech like AI.
Right.
And 4 was just to expand the expectation and stature of HR leaders to do this. And just because you don't have all the authority doesn't mean you don't have the responsibility. Somebody's got to take responsibility. And I think it's going to be a mindset shift, though, because I think HR has always had this lens where we have to have the answers, right? We have to be the experts.
Right.
We have to bring the answers. And this is about facilitating the solutions, right? And I think HR has to work side by side with IT and include who they need to, whether it's from the vendor community, from the business, whatever, to design think this stuff, if for lack of a better term, right? But to solve the problems, right? To drive the solutions, not have it.
And I think that last equation you were talking about, HR should also lead by asking the customer to come in.
Yes.
And to say, hey, listen, we've been away from customers and we haven't actually had that face time.
Exactly.
Let's bring them in and ask them how we could also solve, because you were talking about it when we were talking about it in the first question. We were talking about now, we're not only just talking about the work getting done, we're talking about the outcomes of the work getting done. So let's talk to the customers who are getting the outcomes and saying, what do you need from us? How can we change to better improve all of our services to you to make your world better? And I think the companies who get that today and the companies who do that right now, who've gone through this transformation already, may be a little ahead of that game, or maybe a lot ahead of that game.
Yeah.
But now everybody has that opportunity. We've gotten a big reset button.
Exactly why we called, and this should be the mantra: expanded focus, extended influence. Like that should be the mantra, because it has to, HR really has to understand and needs to be positioned to be influencing what's happening both inside and outside the organization. So you're spot on in that. So that's the new mantra for HR: expand your focus and extend your influence, because that's how this is going to get done.
And I think we're going to leave it right there, because I think that is drop exactly drop the mic, walk out, Chris. Goodbye.
Bah.
So Chris, today we talked about why the world is changing, and we talked about the need for the change and why it's happening right now. We've also talked about some of the technologies and some examples of technologies like AI that are giving us an ability to change now. And we talked a little bit about how and what to do to begin. And you talked about expanding the influence and changing the influence of what HR does.
Right.
Anything else you wanted to wrap up with before we say thank you?
I just think that, the only thing is I'll bring it back to this notion of reimagining work. And I think, you'll see a lot of stuff coming out from us at a research and sensing standpoint, but Deloitte in general, in how do we do that? How do we re-architect work? Because I think it's more than just reimagining it. We actually have to re-architect work. So I'm really looking forward to driving a lot of our POV around that and what we can put out to help people, right? So to watch out for that. The other thing is this notion of really thinking about, as we bring AI in, what impact does this have to our culture, and being focused and intentional about it. So, another thing, like I said, we've got that high impact culture change study coming out, and that aspect that I'm working on around, how do we kind of be in the driver's seat of that culture change is huge. So I'll just leave people with both those outside of, please expand your focus and extend your influence.
Chris, I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but are there ways we might be able to get links to at least the description of those topics from Deloitte?
Absolutely. I'll get you all those, and certainly people can link in and connect if they have questions. Hit me on Twitter, anything like that, but I'll get you some links.
Okay. She said hit her on Twitter, not in person, please.
Yes,
I love my
please.
friend Chris Havrilla, and we thank her very much for her time. You're very welcome to come back again as well if you'd like to.
I would love it.
Awesome. And thank you all for listening. And if you liked today's podcast, please hit subscribe. And if you know somebody who might find value in our conversation, please forward them this podcast. And again, please always stay safe and take care.
That was HR Data Labs. Please visit turetskyconsulting.com/podcast to review the show, add comments about this episode, or add new ideas about upcoming shows you'd like to hear. Feel free to be creative, but please be nice. Thank you for joining us this week on the HR Data Labs podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe.